Okay, good.
Yeah, I can see it just fine. So, pretty much what we're going to do for the format is, again, pretty much like we did last time. So I'm going to be giving you a prompt that's going to be a couple of sentences in length. And from there, I would just want you to start by sort of drawing out the functional requirements, what you think is going to be required on the highest possible level. From what I said, filling in any details that might be missing. And then from
Hmm.
there, we'll carry on into, a series of other things, including things like component architecture, accessibility, security, API design, just design, and so on. Kind of fleshing out as much as we can of every part of the system that's not the back end. So
Perfect.
anything that's sort of in front of an API gateway, that's all yours to design, and that'll all be in scope.
Sounds good.
Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and we'll also stop right about 10 minutes before the hour, at which point I'll be able to give you some initial feedback on how I thought you did, and also give you some space to ask any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Any questions from you before we start?
No, no, all good.
Cool. Sounds great. In that case, I will go ahead and read off it for you now.
Hmm.
So, your goal for today is going to be designing an online recipe uploading and sharing app, a la something like Pinterest. The idea is that users should, one, be able to create and upload recipes to the site. We want them both to support uploading existing recipes via something like an image or PDF format, um, as well as have the ability to fully create these recipes on the site. From the
Hmm.
viewing end, we want users to be able to save recipes that they enjoy to sort of access later, as well as to be able to export them, again, out to a PDF, which they can save onto their machine. As
Hmm.
far as browsing goes, we'd like to support some kind of feed system, so a sort of infinite scroll, where users will have full functionality to search, sort, find the recipes that are relevant to them, and then go through as many results as they want to. So we kind of want that sort of, mobile-friendly experience in which you can just keep scrolling.
Hmm.
And on that note, one final thing, we also want this to be supported on both mobile and desktop. So any considerations that you would use to support it on sort of multiple device layouts to be as responsive as possible. That's going to be really important here.
Okay,
Yeah, but that
perfect.
covers it for my prompt. I know there's still some questions in there, so feel free to ask if anything comes up, and best of luck.
Yeah, thank you so much. One question about the functional requirements. Um, when the user uploads a recipe, that can be in the form of, is it in the form of a file, perhaps a text, another PDF, or just a plain image, correct?
Yeah, good question. So
Mhm.
we'll say that as far as actual uploading goes, we'll just support a PDF format. But we also want that sort of recipe creation ability on the site.
Yeah, so they can also create a recipe from scratch,
Yep.
and that could be just a simple text editor experience where they can add text, links, upload an image, create a link,
Hmm.
and then hit save, and then that will save the recipe. Okay.
Yep.
Now, in terms of this is all pretty good. Support infinite scroll, search and sort recipes. That's fine. Support the desktop and mobile. Can the user also see other users' recipes? I think that would be part of the infinite scroll, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Um, so then this would be something like the user is able to follow, perhaps like a typical, social media experience, follow other users
Hmm.
and see their recipes. And also the user is able to save recipes. Perfect. Do we have any type of like or favorite uh, recipe function where the user can perhaps choose not necessarily save them, but just give other people an indication that they like the recipe?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'll leave
Okay.
the exact implementation of that up to you because I
Yeah.
would love to know what you think. But in general,
Okay.
we definitely want a way to both one, like I said, export to the local machine, so actually download, as well
Uh-huh.
as to save it somewhere on the site that they can go and see their,
Okay.
list of whatever their favorite recipes are.
Okay. Perfect. So say that was save it in the account. Okay. Um, so for the non-functional requirements, typically we will say, we want some sort of secure login uh, system. These days pretty standard with things like passport login or federated login. We do know we want this to work on desktop and mobile, so um, definitely want optimization for mobile. Your typical accessibility features. Um, any other type of functional requirements that come to mind?
I think this will about cover it for
Yeah.
now. If we have some extra time, there might be some things we would throw on there, but I think this would about cover it.
Okay, great. Um, Perfect. And then in terms of the data, um, right? I would like to do this part now because that will help me figure out a lot of the architecture.
Makes sense.
So we know that we have a user ID, correct? We have a recipe. Um, we have a recipe ID, perhaps, as these can be saved by other users. Um, we also have a following uh, table. I imagine that's where we can save all of the other user IDs that we are following, so we can show them in the infinite scroll. Um, let's see. We can create the recipe. We can save the recipes. We can do all of that. We can favorite recipes. Recipe favorite recipes, and that's something that we can use to just keep track of how many recipes we're liking or choosing as favorites. Search and sort recipes. I think that we could do a lot of this with this data that we have. User ID, recipe ID, following favorite. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, I think this will help me start kind of designing the system now. So I'm gonna move on to the graphical part of this, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds great. I think that makes sense.
All right, perfect. So we know that we have a user profile,
Mhm.
and in terms of how this experience will look like from the front end and the different components that we're going to need to create, there's definitely going to be a recipe component.
Can you ask that again? I'm not quite sure what the question was there.
Oh, no, I was just saying that we're going to need a recipe
For sure.
component, and this will save all of the information about the recipe, text, images, um, who created the recipe. That would be the recipe ID, the user ID, all of that information. We probably going to need a or infinite scroll component, or we're going to call it the feed
Mhm.
component, and we know this is an infinite scroll. We wanted to have that functionality, that infinite scroll functionality. In terms of the user, I'm thinking we could probably have a user component as well. This is something where you could show the user profile image, how many recipes that user has created, how many users the user is following, user profile components, how many other people are following this particular user. And now that I'm looking at these components, um, I would like to start designing more or less the actual application. So we have our screen, and then we can start thinking or about how this information is going to flow into each of these components. Is this more or less what you were looking for to see, or am I jumping any particular step?
Apologies, I was muted for a second.
Oh,
But yeah, this definitely aligns. Yeah, I would definitely like you to keep diving into more detail here because I don't think we've reached the point where I would have many questions yet.
sure. Okay, perfect. So definitely in terms of the technologies, this will be a good opportunity for us to start discussing some of uh, the technical requirements in which will allow us to build this application so it meets the functional requirements.
Mhm.
I will suggest uh, a typical React application with a RESTful API. If we do want to eventually later on be able to feed this data into another system or application, that's where the RESTful API will come in handy, because we could just design those different user endpoints and utilize that for any other type of front end that we would like to build. But
Mhm.
for this particular solution, I think that a React application will do the job, especially since it has that infinite scroll experience. So we'll say that we'll have a React based app. Um, uh, this will also be very convenient because we can design all of these components to be responsive for mobile, so there won't be a need um, to do any extra, extra work there. And
Mhm.
for the data, we can use typical REST API and use those different endpoints to feed the data into all these different components.
Mhm.
For your typical infinite scroll, now looking into the user experience, we know that these experiences are best when they are a more or less in one column presentation. Um, since the experience is going to be a scroll experience, we
Makes
don't
sense.
want it to be full screen, especially these days when people have widescreen monitors that could really make the reading experience harder. So we're just going to follow your typical kind of Facebook feed or um, experience where everything is just basically centered in one column of the screen.
Mhm. Makes sense.
Um, for we would like to start the experience um, with a user component. That is something we want to have here at the top, where the user can access the recipes and just kind of navigate through the different screens. We would like to have this feed component kind of be kind of like the container of the rest of the experience. And then we will have our recipes. Now, in terms of how we fit in the recipes into the infinite scroll, are we doing this chronologically, or just based on interest, or just randomly just feeding this as they come?
That is a really good question. Can you elaborate where you would be using these options?
So that is yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think that we definitely forgot to build a some sort of control or filtering component.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that. So let's say filtering component. Okay, and that is what will help us filter through our recipes, and based on the
Mhm.
requirements, yeah, we definitely need that. Yeah, so I totally missed this component.
Mhm.
So yeah, we need a search and sort recipes component. We can say by default that just going to show up in chronological order.
Mhm.
So if the user saved one recipe this morning, then that recipe um, could potentially sorry, if the users created a recipe, then that recipe should show up first by date and by day. So we will have to, by default, let's say they are in chronological order.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense. To answer your question more directly, then, I think on the back end, we'll assume that there's just sort of an arbitrary set of tags, as well as, we want support for something like a text search. Um, so we can assume that there's some kind of search that, will take priority on certain tags. You can filter by tags. And we also want to be able to search within the text of the recipe, to a certain extent. You can assume that there's an endpoint where you essentially pass on any filters as well as any sort of search query parameters, and the backend can handle that.
absolutely. Um, yeah, I think that we can then dive deeper into the functionality of these components,
Sounds good.
and that's perfect. Thank you. So okay, so we'll definitely need your our filtering component, and then we will need our recipe component, which would be uh, what's going to be showing in that feed. Uh, so let me make it this a little bit smaller, and then we're definitely going to be able to see many of these recipe components. I'm imagining that from the user experience, we are probably showing a preview of the recipe, not the entire recipe.
Mhm.
And then once the user selects that recipe, they can go into another page where they can see the entire recipe in more detail. And that's probably where we could put all of these other requirements, like the export as a PDF, or perhaps edit the recipe or update the recipe.
Mhm. Sounds good.
Okay, so we have our component feed. Okay, so this will be our front end. This will be our landing page. If it's okay, I would like to dive deeper into the functionality of each of these components.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, so I'm just gonna then move on to another part of our whiteboard. And in this recipe component, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna extend this, and we can start thinking about all of the different features of this particular component.
Mhm.
So we know that we are going to need some sort of basic editor, text editor. We could easily do that with React. We could definitely use a component library that would allow us to have a text editor that will have all the functionality that we need: images, creating links, even doing something more advanced like entering HTML.
Mhm.
We definitely need a save button. Save recipe. And if this were, I'm thinking that if there is a recipe already saved, that we could also have or export as a PDF button.
Mhm.
Okay, um, good. Let me go back to the functional requirements just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So we can upload recipe, text image, create from scratch, save recipes on the account, export, recipe, search and sort recipes, support desktop mobile. Okay. Um, okay, great. Yeah, I think this is um, pretty basic to what we need for a recipe component. We can create a recipe component. We can add a title. Um, we can do all of our content inside the text editor. We can save the recipe or we can export the recipe. So this will help us to do both things, either create a new recipe or edit a new recipe. And once it's saved, we can potentially export that this recipe as a PDF. Um, let me see. Is this kind of what you had in mind for the functionality? I'm not sure if there's anything here in the functional requirements that I'm missing.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think something that would be useful would to be thinking a little bit about the API design because we haven't dived too much into that, and that's still I would consider an important thing to consider on the front end as well. Um,
oh, okay. Yeah.
so you don't need to worry about too much what the functionality of those API endpoints are. We can black box that out. but just knowing what inputs you would be expected to be sending and what outputs you would want.
Perfect. Okay, good. So yeah, that totally makes sense. So maybe what we could do is like right next to the component, we can start thinking about the recipe API endpoint. So let's say we can think about a recipe. That would be a recipe endpoint. This is what will return. Recipes. Okay, this would be what will return all our recipes. If we were to, let's say, specifically bring back one recipe, uh, then we can use a numerical ID, for example, recipe, 456. This will return our particular recipe. In terms of what else we can do with the recipe endpoint, um, here we can definitely have a recipe let's call this create, and this is
Mhm.
what we're going to do to post or recipe information into the database. And then the export functionality will need uh, an endpoint, since that's all happening on the front end. We don't need to save the exported files. So that won't be necessary from the point of view of the recipe endpoint. What else could we do here for the recipe API? Okay, we can subtract all the recipes. We can create recipes. Um, well, there could be potentially a situation where the user might want to delete, or in other words, let's say archive. Usually it's not a good idea to completely delete something, but just in terms of the user experience, we can do as part of not necessarily a functional requirement, but more of a non-functional requirement, something the user could potentially archive a recipe, and then it will choose delete itself after a certain number of days.
Mhm.
So we could do an archive recipe, and for that, we could do like the recipe. Then we will have the ID, for example, 456, and then archive. Okay. Does this look good for the endpoints of the recipe component?
Yeah, I think that about makes sense.
Okay.
I would be curious about I think you mentioned them, but like what the HTTP methods associated with this are, and if they're not just get endpoints, like what parameters you'd be passing in.
Okay. So you mean like post, delete, create, typical, yeah. So yeah, this will definitely be a this will be a get method.
Mhm.
This will allow us to subtract all that information. This will be a post method, uh, and this will be a delete method. And then to read a particular recipe, then we can use a get method. This will allow us to bring back that one recipe. Um, Now I know that this is for the recipes that the user is getting.
Mhm.
So or the user created. We still need to think about the recipes that are being pulled from other people's profiles
Mhm.
into the feed, and I think that we could probably do that in the infinite scroll component rather. But this recipe component, let's call this recipe component editor. Uh, okay, so this will be for the user to create the recipes. And then, since we already kind of in this recipe, this will be the recipe component view, feed view. I'm going to group this selection so I can edit this component feed. Oh, sorry. feed view. And this will be way simpler component that will just give us a preview of that recipe and who created it, which will actually require us to do a different set of requirements for the API. So in this case, since we are already talking about a different user, we would need the particular user ID. Then we can say recipe, and then we'll get the ID of the recipe. So in this case, let's use another number. This is from someone else. We will have the user, the same user, then the same recipe. Well, this endpoint will basically give us everything that we need for that particular recipe, since that that particular recipe will give us all of the text, the images, and everything that we need to feed it into this recipe component view. In terms of what we're following, then it would be follow, and that will give us the user that we are following. So that would be a way for us to feed the recipes that we are getting for that particular user that we're following into the infinite scroll. I'm not sure if I want to have this here yet, to be honest with you. I was thinking maybe this could be probably something that we could implement in the infinite scroll and then pass to the recipe component view as a prop. But I think I'd be able to decide that later. So in terms of the recipe component, I think I will definitely have two views for this component. What would be the component editor view, and the component editor that would allow us to save, archive, and export, and then a smaller version of this component, which will be a recipe component view that would allow us to view it on the user infinite scroll, but also if it's someone else's, obviously we'll not be able to edit it or archive it, but at least we should be able to export it, because if the user allows us to follow them, that should be an action that should be allowed. And again, we don't need an endpoint for that, because that is something that we could do on the front end. So this component could have an export option. We're going to assume that the component should be able to display any type of information, text, images, links, even video. So that's probably a concern of this view component, the pretty default functionality for this type of component. And then if we are following this person, I guess we can also unfollow them. So if we were to do that from here, unfollow. So if you unfollow this user, then you shouldn't be able to see more recipes from that particular user. So we're not deleting necessarily the recipe, because that doesn't belong to us. The recipe doesn't belong to us, but we will unfollow them, and by unfollow them, they're not going to show up in the feed anymore. Okay. Now, from the point of view of how this component could be designed, I'm thinking that this could be one component, and then have a series of conditions that would allow this component to either be a component editor or a recipe editor or a recipe view component. So I'm just going to encapsulate all of this into one larger component, and I'm just going to call it the recipe component. Okay, trying to make our components as streamlined as possible. Okay. All right, good. So we can go into the user profile component unless you have any questions.
No, this is all making sense so far. I think going into the user profile component sounds good.
All right, perfect. Yeah. We should have probably started with that one, but definitely the recipe component was definitely going to be the one that's have the most functionality. So the user profile component, this could be again a very typical user component where the user could edit edit their profile, perhaps change their username or their picture. So we will definitely have an update button here, and here we could just probably have a typical form that will have things like name, things like location, user picture. See, kind of like your typical user components. Here we could definitely feed some of that information that we already have that could be utilized by the scroll. So we could, in the user profile, we could potentially list the number of people that the user is following, and also allow the user to follow to unfollow those people. List of following profiles. Okay. And then the rest is just your typical user information: name, location, picture. There's tons of React components that have all of that functionality there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think this is pretty good based on the user requirements. We
Yeah.
can dive. Yeah, any questions?
No, I think this all makes sense. We have a little bit more than 10 minutes left. So I did want to dive into a couple of more technical aspects here.
Yeah.
Um, so for one, I wanted to ask more about, we've done pretty good design so far, but what are your ideas for how you're going to accomplish sort of responsiveness on desktop and mobile? Because we've been talking about sort of more general designs.
Oh yes, absolutely. So I would say that this part will be all a part of the styling of the application itself. I would, since we are dealing with a React-based application, potentially we'll use a framework like a Bootstrap or Material UI, which has all of the responsiveness already baked in, and utilize that as much as possible, not trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to responsiveness. I think that for the only part of this experience that could be optimized for mobile could be potentially the recipe component,
Mhm.
because we know mobile this experience can be a little bit difficult to follow, right? Adding text, saving, archiving. So this component could probably have a different view or a different version of it in mobile, something that is more optimized for smaller screens. When it comes to the infinite scroll, I think that that is a typical implementation of mobile. Users are very used to it. So it will be just a matter of resizing these components or this entire experience so it fits well on mobile. But I don't think it will require too much of extra custom functionality. The recipe component will definitely need some of that. And for this, we could potentially start thinking about a way of how we could do a mobile version of this component where this editing experience is a little bit more streamlined. So in my experience, for example, when it comes to forms and things like that, it's best if we kind of use some sort of pagination.
Mhm.
So the component then will have its own specific mobile view in which all of these options will not be presented in one screen, but rather broken down into different pages. So we could say that the page one is the um, profile info,
Mhm.
and this will give the user a lot of that space so they could comfortably edit things like name, picture. Um, oh, sorry, I'm talking about the recipe. So in this particular component, we could give the user a better experience so they can create the recipes better. So the first the first screen will be create recipe. And this is where they will have their typical editor experience, title, text, pictures. We could have then as a second screen, so we could say that this is the second screen, page 2. Then we can have the export options. So if we're dealing with mobile, perhaps we don't want to necessarily save this as a PDF, but we can save this as a different way, something that can allow the user to see the recipe without having to zoom in, because PDFs, usually are documents that are meant for desktop or print view. So we can allow the user to create a more mobile file that they can potentially share with others, or perhaps share via text or something like that. So here we can add some extra features to perhaps export this, and then maybe they want to send it to share by text. Share by text. If we're mobile, basically we have all kinds, an entire universe of possibilities here. Share on Instagram, or share on Facebook. So giving the user not only a more mobile friendly, but a more mobile, an experience that is more in the context of what a mobile app will do in this case, giving them options to share to other social media channels. In terms, is this what you had in mind, for example, or is this probably too much at
No,
this
no,
point?
I think this is good. I think that'll probably be sufficient, at least for that question, though. I think I have a sense that you have a pretty good handle on how to establish that. Um, One other thing that I definitely want to dive into a little bit was what you would be doing for accessibility. What are like features that you think would be important to make this application as accessible to as many users as possible?
Yeah, absolutely, and definitely, I think this is an application that will benefit greatly from uh, you know good accessibility features. So you could do okay accessibility features. You could do good accessibility features. So from your standard accessibility features, we definitely want to make sure that the user can control things like the text size. So that could be something that we could set up in the profile options. So we could definitely do things like text size. We know in terms of the design, we want to make sure that we have enough image contrast. We know for the desktop experience, especially since we're going to have that infinite scroll functionality, there's not going to be more of a navigation. We need a way that someone who is visually impaired, that they can navigate the desktop website with their keyboard. So keyboard navigation and scroll. We need that scroll button for accessibility. Um, so since you mentioned that, I think that we cannot assume that the user is going to be able to scroll. So if the user wants to scroll, they can, but also we need a scroll button, because if we don't have that, then people with visual impairments are not going to be able to use the keyboard, or they're not going to be able to use the screen reader software to know that this is a infinite scroll experience. So yeah, that's a very good point. So we should definitely have a button here, and that could be part of the infinite scroll component. So I'm gonna move that here. So we definitely need that. We need that for keyboard navigation as well as for screen readers. Need scroll button for screen readers. In terms of more accessibility, Definitely want to make sure that we're using, area labels, um, that would just enhance the accessibility feature more. We also want to make sure that these components are created in React using semantic elements. So elements that basically will assist the screen reading experience a little bit better, making sure that we are respecting the document structure, so the keyboard navigation works seamlessly, and people don't end up jumping from one section of the site to another section when they wanted to follow a specific order that they could go back and forth with the keyboard. Um, I would say that has covered pretty much with at least AA compliance for accessibility. Again, accessibility is one of those things that you really have to, test thoroughly to see if you were able to achieve that level of compliance. But for my experience, this would be the things that I will have to implement um, with the application. These are not things that will be in the application by default. This will have to be implemented. So yeah, I definitely think that for the user profile, we need some text size options, so the user can do that on their own. In terms of the design, we want to make sure that we have enough image color and image contrast. In terms of the technicalities and the production and development of the application, we want to make sure that we have keyboard navigation and a scroll button for accessibility, and that we also have a good document structure for screen readers.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that about answers it. I guess one last question, just to wrap us up in the last, 3 minutes here or so. I would like to hear a little bit more about how you're going to actually implement the functionality of the infinite scroll. Either if you've worked on something similar and might know some ideas behind it, or just any ideas for how you would start on implementing that.
Yeah, definitely. The infinite scrolls is going to be, I would say, one of the most important features of this experience. So it will have to be done well. We're gonna need some sort of prefetching on the front end, so we can at least load um, a certain number of recipes that can be viewed by the user right away, and we don't have any type of delay on loading more experiences. I mean more recipes. We want to make sure that we load um, a number of recipes that are readily accessible for the user. So we do that with some sort of prefetching on the front end. In terms of the the scroll functionality, we're going to implement a your typical kind of scrolling um, uh, functionality that has to do with scroll position, detecting the scroll, and being able to trigger events based on the scroll position, so we can keep loading more and more applications. More and more recipes. Um, in React, we could do that fairly easy with things like use state, use effects. So React will definitely have everything that we need to create a good scrolling experience. Um, in terms of um, the 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 CSS, I think that we don't have a lot of styling here. That's something that we could definitely load right away into the application. But in terms of the content and the infinite scrolling, yeah, the prefetching and the lazy loading of images will help a lot. The worst thing that we can have is a slow scrolling, infinite scroll experience. So we want to make sure that that's as seamless and as fast as possible. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely did. I think that actually just about wraps us up for now, because we're right about at time.
Great.
But yeah, like I said at the beginning, I'll give a little bit of initial feedback on how I thought you did, and then we'll be able to give you some space to ask any questions you might have. So overall, I think this was really positive. There was a lot of really good things that you managed to do in this interview. I think particularly the thing that I was the most positive on was just a lot of the diagramming being really clear. It felt like particularly practice on a lot of, the ways you were able to draw the components out. And as well, I think it made a lot of sense the way that you did really break things down into components. A lot of the times what folks designing these kinds of systems tend to do is they tend to be pretty vague where the lines between components are. And it makes it really ambiguous. They'll do a good job diagramming, but it'll be really ambiguous how they would actually implement that in, a modern JavaScript framework. And I think by, clearly labeling, okay, here's where the text editor would go, for example, you can imagine this being a text area or, some kind of advanced React component that implements a text area. And similarly for everything else here, the user profile component, for example, that could be reused several places. The recipe component, of course, also can be reused several places. So yeah, that's kind of the core of what I look for in a lot of this interview, and I thought you did quite well. Also, towards the end, when I was sort of diving into more specifics, I felt very satisfied with the answers, particularly on things like the infinite scroll, accessibility. It felt like you had a pretty good handle, which felt based in a little bit of actual experience. So yeah, definitely if I'm asking, front-end specific interview questions, it's a lot with the assumption that you're trying to get someone who already has that professional experience. So I think you did a pretty good job of demonstrating that. I think as for what I could have seen improved, definitely a little bit more detail on the API design in particular. I think, so in contrast to how good of a job you did with the diagramming, I think you could have written a lot more text. That's something that I also, kind of encourage people to do as much as possible is really anytime you say anything important, writing it down. So again, like that last chunk where we were talking about more optimization, accessibility, scalability, how you would implement the infinite scroll, just trying to take notes and, really write them on the screen can be super helpful, especially because a lot of the times when interviewers are sort of evaluating the interview, they're going to do it not immediately after it's been conducted. So in the case that an interviewer is maybe looking back at a recorded video of what you did, having as much of sort of your key points written down makes it so that they can just kind of glance over at it, immediately see, oh, they hit this point, they hit this point, they hit this point, rather than having to sort of scrub through the video and find where specific points were discussed.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense, yeah.
So that would be one thing. Other than that, I would say we did pretty well on the initial requirements, but I think similarly there, just kind of breaking those down a little bit more and reordering things such that we start with the functional requirements, then go into sort of the non-functional pieces that we ended with in this interview, then going into the API design, and then sort of saving the last, I would say like 35 minutes or so for all of these component architecture pieces. Just because you really want to have as much context for the system as possible before sort of diving into that. And I think also on sort of the data modeling, that was a place where we could have spent a little bit more time just to really dive into what a recipe is, because we didn't explore that too much. I think there could be a lot of sort of distinct components about recipes, things like ingredients, steps, images that might be attached. And those are also pretty helpful. So yeah, those are sort of some of the things that I think could have been improved. Really, the big ones I would say are just, one, write down more stuff. Two, probably explore the API design and data modeling, more. But yeah, despite that, I know that sounded like a lot more negative than positive, but most of the negative points were relatively small. I would still very comfortably call this a pass.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I definitely, I know that I need to spend more time on the API and definitely going to work more on that because I will say that that's probably my weakest point at this right now. I'm pretty good with design and UX and UI and React. Usually when I work on projects, they give me the API, right? I don't get to design my own APIs that often. I don't think I ever done one. So that's probably something I should put in my to-do list of kind of practice projects is designing an API because I never done it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for front end, it's a lot more, I think, like I said during the interview, it's a lot more about knowing what the inputs and outputs that you would want to work with as a front end designer. Saying, okay, what's reasonable to sort of design components for users to input? What's, good outputs? Like, for example, for the inference scroll, you might want a specifically paginated API, deciding, okay, well, I need to get one page at once. Otherwise, if we're fetching, all of this data, it's going to load so slowly. So those kind of considerations are more the things that I would focus on as a front-end engineer. But like I said, you can totally black box the actual, functionality or what's happening to get you from input to output.
Perfect.
Yeah. Any questions from you before we drop off here?
No. I appreciate all your feedback. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
I think that for me, the next step will be to schedule a technical
Cool.
front end. We started one, and then I had an issue, and we had to drop off. But I'll try to
Yeah.
see if we can we can get one going maybe in the next couple of weeks.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds perfect. I'm pretty sure you already have it, but I'll go ahead and pass on my email in the chat here as well. Feel free to reach out there if you had any questions. And then I'll also have your written feedback out for you within the next day or two. And that'll have most of what I said here along with some written scores.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thank you so much as well.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.